Alright, I'm gonna do another video, but my last video I didn't think it was very coherent, so this time I'm gonna try to talk faster. I'm gonna try to summarize my thoughts in a very more coherent fashion. Now Ryan believes that he wants to separate the United States into different racial states and also into different states based on other things like religion or political beliefs. And I don't think this is gonna actually happen. My main belief of this is because Western civilization is now in a period in which people have innate tendencies, archetypes, for example, like the communist or the white nationalist, to keep people together or to, keep the peace or to unite or multiculturalism or whatever. Those all fit in, and racism is kind of against this, collectivist, let's be peaceful or whatever that the Europeans now have. I mean, this is really in its course with civilization. And my argument is that in a period of time, in a period like this, there's no way that a movement like this can gain credence because there's too many barriers to its construction. I mean, for example, if you look at the All Nations Party, right? I mean, the main dominant political ideas in the United States are completely to the contrary. I mean, if we're going to go back in history and we're going to go back to the heretics in Europe, for example, I mean, if we're all witches, like 1 out of 100 people are witches, and we're going to try to take over the social political climate of the day, and what's going to happen? We're not going to do it. Well, why? Because even if we gain control, people are naturally not going to want to do it. I mean, he talked about the communist in Imperial Japan. You know how people have innate tendencies and innate archetypes that are natural and due to hereditary. And I think that's true. And I think that if we understand how this actually happens, then we're going to understand how people are going to not want to do it. I mean, we're going to have 1 out of 100 people who have this certain natural tendency, which we can call white nationalism, or we can call communism. I mean, you can't get a bunch of communists to convince people, to have a land for communism. I mean, say that was an alternative to white nationalism. I mean, the social democrats probably believe that racism or whatever white nationalism is in their mind is probably worse than communism. So in this scenario, if the communists were to try to have a block of land for themselves, I don't think it would work. It wouldn't work. So what needs to happen is that Ryan and anyone else needs to understand that there are too many barriers, and this specific time in history is probably the worst time to do this. It's probably the worst time to have these separate states for for different identities. And so it doesn't make much sense. Even he himself believes that these things are natural, that the state provides some human need for, a heretic and a group, and these people are really just the same as the people in medieval times, albeit a little bit more intelligent, have a little bit more nutrients, but they're still kind of the same people. And so I view the relationship between the state and the people and their needs as I mean, they're correlated with each other. I mean, I don't think that the state actually has its own. I don't think the state is actually functioning very separate from the people. I mean, if you look at the Europeans today and how they feel and what stage of civilization they're actually in, we can see that these changes in the European have really just, the Europeans themselves have really just changed these institutions themselves. That these institutions aren't really separate identities, but rather a representation of the people who are living in them. Albeit they still maintain control because people's minds are authoritative. They're really just a representation of the people that are there. However, the All Nations Party, I mean, can't really gain any ground. I mean, I think he probably realizes, I mean, he hasn't been posting a lot of videos lately, that this is probably not going to happen. I mean, it's there's not enough probability for this to happen. And even in the United States, the population of whites is going down. Noam Chomsky said that in 50 years, maybe less, that whites will be a minority in the United States. I mean, how are they going to gain control if they're a minority in the United States? I mean, how are they going to vote? How are they going to do any of that? How are they going to, what about the 50% who are going to tell Obama or whatever president that they want this separation movement? Even less than 50%, because that assumes that 100% of white people in 50 years would do that. And today it's probably like 70%. So that's 35. If it's half the population supporting it. And so this is it's probably not. There's no reason for it to happen. And in history, there's a reason for something to happen. Like, say, the Great Schism, for example. It created Protestantism, right? So there's this Martin Luther who created Protestantism, right? I mean, in history, there's always a specific cause. I mean, people's minds aren't that elastic. I mean, something happens and they understand what to do, and that's what happens. I mean, in the Civil War, for example, there were two very different cultures. They were separated from each other. People felt different. And in the South, they just got fed up with it, right? But in today, we don't really have that separation anymore. It isn't that pronounced. And so, in history, again, archetypes, right, there's not even a specific, significant culture for this to even arise from. I mean, in the South, are they always going to believe? Are they all going to believe this? Probably not. There's no significant historical reason for this to happen, and therefore, why would it happen? There's no, significant reason that this archetype specifically would take dominance, or would be represented in a system where archetypes compete for each other for dominance in a social political climate. There's no significant reason for this. And he's saying that if he wants people to just accept their difference and separate, well, even if the United States gets worse, I don't think people are going to want to separate. I don't think people will separate based on racial lines. And it also has to be said that that no real change has really been made in history with a relatively small archetype, trying to make change, right? I mean, usually there's a historical reason, and there's a historical response. And it's all very orchestrated. It's all very coherent, and so I think that people should understand that this isn't a very logical thing. That it can't really happen. It's. And I think that Fringe Elements, I know Fringe Elements has a high IQ, and I know he probably doesn't understand. He probably understands that this isn't, that this really can't happen. It's kind of like Texas seceding from the Union. I mean, even if a lot of people want it to happen, people are lazy. The state is lazy. I mean, are they going to really take control of the state of Texas when the state of Texas has pressures from its minority populations or whatever that is? I mean, it really doesn't seem likely. And there's a democratic system currently, and everyone's trying to get their attention from the minorities, right? They're trying to keep the peace or associate with them, and so is there really going to be any need to separate? I mean, if anything, separation is really just going to get the whites less land, and that's not what they want. I mean, currently in the United States, whites are the people who really govern the United States. I mean, most of the people in the Federal Reserve or the United States Senate or whatever, they're probably white. They're not Jewish, and they're not going to want to lose all that land. They're not going to want to lose the land to Hispanics. They're not going to want to lose the GDP. They're not going to want to lose the foreign policy, and so none of this really makes sense. It's really just a jerk off of trying to associate with the community. And so I really don't understand why one would even want to pursue this any further. And I think that further discussion about the actual potential and reason for this to happen should be discussed. That's really all I have to say. Thank you for listening.